Hello GDQ Games Committee, I am Nerd Squared, and this will be my submission of Shadow of the Tomb Raider with the any percent category for AGDQ 2020. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a very fun speedrun. With the any percent category in particular, there's a lot of fun glitches that we use to skip huge chunks of the game that all look really cool when performed properly, and so hopefully I'll be able to do a good job of showcasing that here. For a frame of reference, the glitchless run through this game, or glitchless category of this game, which I have done runs of, takes around 3 hours, 2 hours and 55 minutes if you're on a very good run. But with the any percent run, like the run I'll be showcasing here, you can complete the game in under an hour and 20 minutes in real time. So you can obviously tell just from that the any percent category has some very broken glitches that we can use to our advantage. So you'll see that in just a bit, but before I start the actual run, I want to go over a couple of things real quick. First thing is that I'll be starting this run from a save file, which is the save file I currently have selected in Cozumel. That is because when you start the game from a new game, there's around 12.5 minutes of cutscenes and downtime, or rather unskippable cutscenes and downtime, and obviously we don't want to sit through that in a speed run, especially in a marathon run. So by starting from a save file, we get to avoid all that downtime. And also with this save file, I have the game set to the easiest difficulty for this game, which is Smart and Resourceful, otherwise, which is this game's easy difficulty. There's actually 3 different sections to the difficulty. There's combat difficulty, puzzle difficulty, and the amount of resources you get in the environment. And I have all 3 of those set to the easiest difficulty, which is easy. Mainly just for convenience sake, but also because with easy difficulty, the game adds in an auto-aim for the combat, which makes the few sections of combat that we do in this run quite a bit easier to deal with, because there's not a whole lot of combat that we do in this run, because we skip a lot of the game in this category. But yeah, with those 2 things out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started. Timing for this game starts when I select this save file, so we'll go in 3, 2, 1, go. Alright, so right out of the gate we get a loading screen, and whenever you load a game from the main menu, the game can take a while to load that save. So let's see how long it takes here. I've had it take as long as 40 seconds before, so we'll see what happens. 25 seconds is kind of mediocre, but we'll roll with it. It's not going to matter anyway, because we don't really use real time for this game. Well, obviously I'm going to use real time for this submission. But anyway, we start in this starting area, Cozumel. Basically, there's this organization named Trinity that's trying to steal something called the Silver Dagger. But we don't want them to steal that dagger, so we're going to try to stop them. First I'm going to get a stealth kill on that guard, and right away we're going to do a sequence break. There's normally a sequence here where you'd have to shoot this guy with an arrow and then do a climbing sequence, but instead I'm going to shoot an arrow at the ground. That'll make it so the guard is startled, so I can go over here and squeeze myself between the tree and the wall, and we're out of bounds. And going out of bounds like this is something that you'll see me do pretty frequently throughout the whole run, so you'll get to see that later. But the reason I want to go out of bounds here is I mentioned a bit ago there's a sequence that the game would have you do here where it teaches you the climbing mechanics, but we don't have time for that, instead we're just going to skip it. And I'm running out of bounds in this direction because I want to jump out of bounds right around here. That looks fine. There we go. So if I jump in that way, what will happen is when I touch the ground and die, I will trigger the quest line, Hunter's Moon, which will load me into the next area, the Skull Caves. And as soon as I load in there after going out of bounds, I need to reload checkpoint, because when I first load in there after dying from falling out of bounds, the area isn't properly loaded, and by checkpoint reloading like that, the area fully loads. So I'm going to do another glitch here called, I don't believe it has an official name, so I'll call it scramble clipping. Essentially how it works, it's kind of tricky to do. You hold back and aim in one direction, scramble, and then hold back and aim while looking in a different direction after scrambling. There we go. That particular trick is actually kind of hard, so it's good that I got it. And when you do that set of actions successfully, what happens is there's some weird clipping issues that occur with Lara's model, which will allow you to clip up surfaces, and in that case I use it to clip on top of this tunnel here. And I'm clipping out of bounds here because there's about 1 minute or so sequence at this point where the game teaches you the swimming mechanics and how to deal with traps. And by going out of bounds here, we can skip that entire sequence. And you might be wondering how I'm going to get back in bounds, and the answer is this little hole right here on the map that I can use to get back in. I need to be careful to not hit this tripwire that's right in front of me, because I've accidentally hit that tripwire way too much in my runs. So after that little bit, we get our first puzzle, where we have to get to the top of that pyramid in order to get the silver dagger that I mentioned before. In order to get to the top of that pyramid, we need to, or at least we would normally, have to manipulate the positioning of these ball platforms. We'll still do some of the puzzle, but for the most part we're going to skip the puzzle with a really cool trick coming up that is definitely a treat for those that haven't seen this run. First I'm going to do a time saver here where I just try to move through this area as fast as I can, and by doing that I skip a walk and talk sequence with Jonah, well, which saves a few seconds there. I'm going to push this cart and then pull the barrier open there with a rope arrow. And I'm going to do a neat little trick here once I get on top of this pyramid. First I'm going to line myself up with a bow and then do a jump. And I'm going to grab that top rung of the platform there. You're normally supposed to climb up to that rung and then fall down. By grabbing that rung like that, we can trigger that sequence early, which saves a few seconds. Maybe even just 1 or 2 seconds, but it's still a time saver, so I go for it and runs. So this upcoming trick I'm about to do, there's a much harder variant of it that you can do, but it's not at all marathon safe. So I'm going to go for a much safer and a little easier alternative. First I have to reload checkpoint there to despawn the rope I was climbing on. Alright, so to do this trick I'm going to get on this brick, make sure I'm positioned right. Looks good. I'm going to aim at this line in the rock, throw, or jump, and then throw the grappling hook while I'm jumping, which is a pretty specific timing, so hopefully I get it. There we go, got it. So what I just did there is something called airwalking, and I'll explain that in a moment because I have to make sure I don't fall out of bounds here. Unfortunately I failed it, so I have to redo that. So the really scary thing about that is you have to get on that wood plank at the very end there, and the wood plank has such a tiny hitbox, which makes it really hard to land on it. Dang, didn't get it there. So this will take me a few tries, but luckily my estimate for this submission is pretty generous. Dang, I'm not getting it right now. There we go, got it there. So hopefully I get it this time. It's kind of unfortunate that I missed it the first time. Got it there, alright. So by doing that tricky out of bounds sequence there, we skip the rest of the puzzle, and we also end up skipping a cutscene where Lara picks up the silver dagger, which is kind of the catalyst behind the entire plot of the game, as you'll see throughout. Now I'll explain more of the nuances about airwalking later, because it's actually a kind of complicated trick. But for now we'll do this combat sequence. First I have to get a stealth kill on that guard, which that's the optimal way to kill him. I'm going to climb up here. As I go up this hill I'm going to do 2 quick melee swings, because by doing that I skip a large amount of the slow walk through that mud. There's 3 guards here. I'm going to take them all out with the shotgun. And you can kind of see the auto-aim from easy mode kick in here as I prepare the shotgun to kill those guards. I'm going to equip the assault rifle for the next section of combat. And this next section of combat is pretty neat for going fast because you don't have to kill these guards that are right in front of me. Instead, you can just sneak past them, so I'm going to do some dodge rolls to do that. And then I'm going to go to the other end of the battlefield here with some more dodge rolling. It's tricky with this cutscene where they spot us. Sometimes I'm unable to skip this cutscene, and in that case that happened. So as soon as this cutscene ends, I'm going to reload checkpoint. This despawns a few enemies and puts these two guards right in front of me in a more consistent position. I'm going to go through this area as fast as I can as soon as I kill those two guards, because by doing that, I despawn a couple of guards that are normally supposed to spawn in the room next to me, which ends up saving a bit of time. Alright. And after that, we get a quick time event where we break open that gate, and this cutscene right here, where we would meet the antagonist of the game for the first time, but we're going to skip it. Also, there's the silver dagger that we don't actually have because we skipped it just a bit ago. And it's kind of funny when we think about it, that we skipped the silver dagger, because, as I mentioned, the catalyst behind the plot of the game is Lara stealing the dagger. And obviously we skipped the dagger, so technically in the speedrun of the game, the plot is not canon at all. So anyways, this is the first running sequence, I guess you could say, although it's more like a swimming sequence. Throughout the game, there will be these natural disasters that occur as part of the plot that serve as the running sections of the game, although, again, in this case, it's a swimming section. And a running theme with the reboots that you'll notice throughout this run, especially in some unskippable cutscenes that we'll end up having to watch, is that Lara's day just goes horribly wrong, and that one thing after another just goes awry. Like in this case, we get pushed underwater by that debris. And this is the first real swimming section of the run. We kind of had a bit of swimming earlier when we went out of bounds in the Skull Caves, but this is the first swimming section that I'll do inbounds. I just have to swim over to the store real quick. We can ignore that air bubble right there because we don't need it. I'm going to open the store with the QTE, and there's a neat little trick I can do as soon as I open the store. A checkpoint will trigger, and I'm going to reload checkpoint off of that. Now what that'll do is that'll skip the animation of Lara opening the door after she breaks it open, which saves a few seconds in in-game time. This game is one of those PC games where the main timing method is time without loads, which removes all of the cutscenes and all of the loading screens from the runtime. Because of all the unskippable cutscenes I have to watch, though, it ends up being around 30 minutes of load times, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. So yeah, we break out of the bus there to get out of the underwater section, and we come across our first real climbing section of the game, after I climb up this ledge right here. Climbing controls are really awkward in this game, because if you switch between directions too quickly and then try to jump, what'll happen is instead of going the direction you are holding, Lara will instead go the direction you were holding previously, which more often than not will result in Lara just veering off to the side and dying, and we obviously don't want that because the dying animation wastes time. It's scary, really, only on instances like this where we have to do some optimized platforming on ledges, which you'll see coming up as soon as I jump here. Luckily, this particular section isn't too difficult for optimizing the platforming. It's more common to die in this section on this part coming up where I have to do some optimized hopping on these ledges. So I'm going to initiate this cutscene where, unfortunately, this NPC dies. And during this cutscene, I'm actually holding the D key and mashing jump, which in my case is spacebar. That will make it so as soon as the cutscene ends, Lara will hop over to the next ledge, which saves a bit of time. Alright, so that's the first area, Cozumel, down. One death, unfortunately, to the airlock, but I managed to get it within a minute of an ideal pace, so that's pretty good there, actually. So this is the first unskippable cutscene of the run. There's around 13 to 14 minutes of these I'll have to watch in total throughout the whole run. It's the unfortunate thing about this game, having to reset and watch these cutscenes, but it's the nature of the beast with this game. It's kind of weird when you think about it that some cutscenes in this game are unskippable, because from what I remember, both Tomb Raider 2013 and Rise of the Tomb Raider, previous Tomb Raider reboots, all had skippable cutscenes, but in this game there are some cases where you can't skip the cutscenes. That's really strange, but we'll just get past that. There are ways we can make the unskippable cutscenes entertaining, though, and you'll see that later. So what's happening as part of the plot here is we got out of Cozumel successfully, and what happened in addition to Lara stealing the silver dagger in the tomb is when she stole the silver dagger, she came across a mural. On that mural was a trail of clues that essentially gives like vague instructions on how to save the world after triggering the Mayan apocalypse, which after stealing the silver dagger she triggered a Mayan apocalypse, as you could probably tell by that tsunami that occurred in the previous section. But anyway, she finds this trail of clues on the mural, and she and Jonah decide to follow that trail of clues, which they're kind of telling about here in this cutscene. In a second here, Jonah will look through a window and see a mountain. That mountain is in an area called Kuagyaku, which is one of the future areas we'll be going to as part of the game. And one particular thing I want to talk about here, in addition to lore, is there is a donation incentive I'll be offering alongside this submission, which is at the campfires, which are kind of this game's save system. You can change the skin that Lara is wearing, and one particular costume that's really entertaining is the blocky Tomb Raider 2 skin that we all know and love. And the Tomb Raider 2 skin makes some of the cutscenes later in the game, particularly the unskippable cutscenes we'll have to watch as part of this run, pretty entertaining, and I think it'll definitely have some merit for a showcase incentive, or a marathon donation incentive. So I'll be submitting that alongside this, and I'll be showcasing what the Tomb Raider 2 skin looks like in this submission as well. So again, Jonah looks through a window, sees where the next clue is, which is this mountain with some clouds around it. And so we direct our pilot here, whose name is Miguel, to fly to that area. And keeping with the running theme of Lara's day going horribly wrong in the reboot trilogy, we end up getting in some bad turbulence here because of the storm that's happening around us as we're flying, and unfortunately, Miguel gets killed by some hail, I think, that flies through the windshield there. Lara promptly tries to get the plane level, but fortunately she fails to do so, and we end up crashing in the Peruvian jungle, which is where the next area of the game will be. And fun fact about this cutscene, it's actually the same cutscene that plays when you start from a new game, and New Game Plus as well. It's just some slightly cut to look a little different. Yeah, we're finally out of cutscene land there, and we can get back to some gameplay. Yay! So the main thing to keep in mind for this jungle section here is I'll be needing to grab some supplies for way later in the run. In particular, there's 3 key things I'm going to need to grab. Achiotes, which are this bush in front of me, for healing, because I'll be forced to heal during a certain fight later. Wood, I'll be needing to grab wood because I need to craft some arrows later, and wood is one of 2 components that you need for that. And I'll also be grabbing cloth because I need that particular item to craft explosive gadgets for a later section. And luckily for this route, there's plenty of opportunities to grab those supplies, so we don't have to really worry about having too little of an item in order to progress. You can't sprint here, so you can just jump like that to optimize your movement through there. So this early section of the game is kind of done as is. There's not a whole lot you can do to skip things, at least not yet, because we don't have access to the movement options that we need to do so. And so we pretty much just do this area in essentially what is the intended manner. There are some things I'll be doing here and there to save time that I'll be sure to touch on. But for the most part, it's pretty much done as is. So, really cool section, by the way, where you just run through the trees. It's one of my favorite parts of the game, personally. This game is really good casually and has some really good sections of the game, but unfortunately we're skipping a lot of those in this particular category. I'm going to do a movement optimization here, where I land on those rocks as I land from that as I fall from that mudslide. That'll make it so I can get an extra jump in order to save a bit of time. You'd normally land in that mud and you'd have to walk through it really slowly. So what's happening here is we need to get our gear back in order to progress with the game, but our gear is held up in a box, which is held up in some nets, or a net rather, that's being held up by some ropes. And we need to cut down those ropes, but we need a knife to cut them down, and we obviously lost our knife in the crash. And so we're going to get a makeshift knife from this propeller, from this plane right here. Fortunately, we get attacked by this eel here, so we're going to use this knife to kill it. Lara is all about killing the animals in this game, and that'll be a running theme throughout the jungle here. An interesting thing to note, by the way, about the QTEs is that this game does have a feature where if you just hold down the button for the QTE, the game will mash the QTE for you. It's not really faster, so I just manually mash the QTEs. And I have to break open these 3 boxes here to sharpen the knife that we just got. The nice thing about these boxes is that they are on a consistent spawn every playthrough. They are not randomized. And so I can just go up to them since I know where they are. After breaking those 3 boxes, we're going to go over to this rope right here to cut it. Or at least we're going to attempt to cut it. The game will give us an objective that prompts us to use the campfire, the base camp here. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to upgrade to the makeshift knife to progress with the game. I'm going to get a skill here called Riposta's Drop, which I'll explain what that does in a moment, but we have more important matters to attend to, which is to go into our inventory here, the outfit menu, and switch to not that skin, but this skin from Tomb Raider 2. Look at those polygons. Best graphics in the Tomb Raider series, circa 1998. But yeah, what the Riposta's Drop skill actually does is it'll let me do a roll when I land on the ground after doing a jump. So for a lot of the rest of the run, you'll see me do some jump rolls, because that's the fastest way to move Lara around when you're not breaking the game. So we've cut down both of the ropes. Now we can go over to this box here to, if I can climb up, that is. There we go. That was not working for a moment there. It's kind of weird. So we've cut down both of those ropes, and we'll get our bow back from that box. We don't have our assault rifle or shotgun quite yet. We'll get that later through story progression. But for now, we just have to move along. After I go through this canyon here, we'll drop down off the rope. So now we have our bow back. We want to try to find our pilot as part of the plot. And we do come across our pilot, but unfortunately our pilot, Miguel, is very much dead as a result of some jaguars mauling him to death. And the jaguars that we come across, they really don't like that we wandered into their territory like we did, and so they're going to challenge us to a fight here, which will do just that in an upcoming fight sequence. We have a pretty slow walking sequence, though, up until then, so for an actual marathon performance of this would be a pretty good point for donations. While you do walk really slowly for most of this, you can input a jump here and then a roll to get up to that ledge a bit quicker. Alright, so here's the jaguar fight. The idea behind this jaguar fight is we want to shoot this enemy a bunch with arrows, which I'm kind of missed that first shot, but that's fine. The nice thing about this fight for getting the supplies, like I mentioned before, is at periodic times during this fight, the jaguar will go into these burrows in the background. And we can take the time they spend going between burrows to grab supplies. Again, the main ones I want to focus on are cloth, like this 2 cloth right there. Achiotes for healing, since the game forces us to heal. And wood for crafting arrows. We don't really need to focus too much on wood, because we'll get plenty of that throughout the run, but I just grab some here for safety. Once you shoot this jaguar with enough arrows, a second jaguar will come out, where we'll shoot that jaguar, or rather, the jaguar will trigger a cutscene where we do a QTE, which will trigger a cutscene where we kill the jaguar by stabbing it. So we do the QTE, trigger a cutscene where we kill the jaguar, and we're forced to heal, which fortunately I had plenty of shields for that. I won't need to worry about crafting arrows for later in the run, because we don't really need too many arrows, we just need enough to do the run. Which we don't really need that much to do the run anyway. So that's about the end of the as intended section of the run. Pretty soon here we'll be breaking the game wide open again, but first we have to climb up this rock face. Once I get to the top of this rock face, I'm going to grab some extra feathers just for safety. It's another crafting item that you need to make arrows. You can also use it to restore outfits, so that's not relevant in this speedrun. So after skipping this cutscene where we meet Jonah, I'm going to interact with this campfire here. Campfires create a checkpoint that adds their own separate save, so you can go back to those saves if you happen to fail a trick, like this jump I'll be doing right here. There we go, got it first try. You kind of have to delay that jump, but not to the point where you jump too late, otherwise you'll obviously fall off that rock. So, like before in the tomb, I'm going to do an airwalk here, which I might have actually gotten first try. Yeah, there we go, first try. So that airwalking is a lot harder than it looks, even though that looked pretty mundane, it's actually pretty tricky. And the reason it's so tricky is it's a pretty tight timing. As I kind of mentioned before, for airwalking you want to jump and then throw the grappling hook during the jump animation. And the tricky thing with that though is that it's pretty tight. It's not exactly frame perfect, but it might as well be because of how precise it is. Basically, like I said, you want to press jump on a certain, or press grapple on a certain frame during the jump animation. And what will happen is you'll grapple onto the ledge and then jump and then land on the ground at the same frame. And what happens then is the game lets you roam around the air, which is why you're able to walk through the air like this. But it also makes you not lose height since the game thinks you're on the ground. And so, with this glitch, you can skip huge chunks of the game. Like right here, I skipped around 15 minutes of the game. To give a description of what I skipped another fight with the jaguar that we kind of encountered before. There'd be a stealth section here, where, by the way, there's supposed to be a tank right here. But because we did sequence break just a bit ago, that tank is not loaded, so we can just run right past it. Anyway, there'd be a stealth section here with Jonah, and then right before that stealth section, there'd be sort of a flashback sequence where you platform around this young Lara in the Croft manor, which is one of my favorite sections of the game personally, but unfortunately we skip it. So we skip all of that and go straight to the next area of the game, which is AGDQ. I'm gonna grab some cloth there for safety, and you'll notice that Jonah spawns in right there. And this sequence is kind of weird because this is supposed to be a walk and talk sequence with Jonah, where you go into town, but it triggers early because of the fact that you didn't enter the area in the intended way. You're supposed to have done all of what I just described, but we obviously skipped that. So anyways, gonna do a forced dialogue sequence here with this NPC, but luckily we can skip it. And the game forcibly opens the map to show you where the next objective is, but we can just close out of that with escape. This section can tend to lag really hard, even on pretty good PCs, because there's a lot of NPCs and building models in this area. That'll be a problem with another section later in the game, but we'll alleviate that problem soon enough. So, how the major areas are kind of structured in this game, and really in the other games in the Reboot trilogy, is each area of the game acts as their own separate hub, and within those hubs there's a set of tasks. They're sort of like quests, or objectives really, that you have to do as part of the plot in order to progress. In the case with this area, the first quest we're given is to go to this tomb, which entails doing a few fights with some Trinity soldiers. And then there'd be a puzzle we do that's actually really cool when done fast, but unfortunately we're going to skip that. And how we're going to skip it is squeezing between the statue here and the tree, holding left while slowly moving the camera left. What that'll do is it'll put me on top of this palm tree so I can jump out of bounds here. I'm going to use this tiny gap so I can go even further out of bounds to get on top of these rocks. Then I'm going to get on top of this pyramid here, line myself up to make sure I don't fall off. Alright, we're good. So this is the very obvious out of bounds where you can tell what's happening. Clearly. For a lot of the out of bounds from here on out, at least with the out of bounds like this where we go very deep out of bounds, there will be a lot of trees and shrubbery all over the place because obviously the game doesn't intend for you to go that far out of bounds, and so the developers didn't really have to care about giving you any sort of visibility. Luckily we don't have to go very far out of bounds there, we just have to go out of bounds for a little bit and then jump back in bounds. And the reason we want to go back in bounds is because there is a little sequence here where if we go to this other side of the ledge, climb up, and then jump over, we sort of tricked the game into thinking that we're at the very end of the quest lines that you have to do in Kuwagyaku. As you can see, our current objective is to return to Kuwagyaku, and the Path of the Dead quest line. That essentially means that we have skipped all of Kuwagyaku. So this section would, I'd say, take around 20 minutes if you do it glitchless, but we complete this section in around 5. And I actually did another trick on top of that right afterwards. Normally you'd have to slow walk through that entire section that I just went through, but I rolled through the trigger, and by rolling through the trigger, we avoid having to slow walk through that entire section, and instead we can do some jump rolls through there. So as the objective says now, after doing that entire out of bounds there, we are going to meet up with Jonah and Abby, who's another character that we meet in this section of the game. And I try to trigger the sequence by going inside the stairs. So at this point, we have successfully kind of furthered our quest to follow the trail of clues, and so we investigate this opening that we found in the ruins. As a result of going through the opening, though, we trigger a trap, and after this trap triggers, we are essentially forced to do a series of trials, a series of 3 trials. The Trial of the Jaguar, which is a swimming section coming up, the Trial of the Spider, which is a platforming puzzle, and then the Trial of the Eagle, which is probably one of my favorite cutscenes or not cutscenes, but puzzles in the game. So you'll see that later. So first we'll be doing the Trial of the Jaguar. Kind of like in the Skull Caves earlier, it is a swimming section. And this swimming section, I'll take the time to explain one key aspect about the water sections, which is that when you go through these water sections normally, there's an air gauge. Obviously, when that air gauge runs out, you die. Normally, you're supposed to use these air bubbles, like the ones in front of me, to refill your air gauge to full, but reloading checkpoint does the same thing. So I'm going to reload checkpoint as soon as the checkpoint triggers, and that'll refill Lara's air gauge. And not only does it refill Lara's air gauge, it also puts this upcoming eel in a consistent spawn every time. And so I can utilize that fact to go through the room and avoid the eel pretty easily. To avoid the eel, though, I also have to hug the left side of the room here. You kind of saw the eel there on the right side of the screen. I need to make sure that I don't touch that eel, because if I do end up touching that eel, it'll trigger a quick time event where I have to stab the eel, kind of like the eel that I killed in the Peruvian jungle. And going through that QTE obviously wastes time, so we want to skip it. So that's the Trial of the Jaguar done. Now we're doing the Trial of the Spider, which is probably the quickest trial of the 3. A little platform mistake there, but that's fine. The Trial of the Spider, as I mentioned, is kind of a platforming puzzle. You have to get to the top of the room. And there's a skip you can do here that saves around 10 seconds, but just for the sake of consistency and not wasting a bunch of time to the trick, I'm not going to go for it, and instead I'm going to do this trial as normal. Which entails going to the top of the room here, and then grappling onto a rock in the middle of the room in order to swing across to the exit. Alright, so we're going to go to the top here. There's the rock that we need to swing. So I'm going to grapple onto it, shimmy down, and then swing across to the other side. The trick would basically be you jump from that ledge I climbed on before, and then try to grapple onto that ledge that leads to the exit. But it's kind of tricky, because if you grapple and Lara ends up too low, you'll instead grab onto that series of ledges you have to climb up to get to the top, which ends up wasting a bit of time if that happens. So I decided to not go for it there, just for the sake of consistency. So next is the last trial of the 3 trials, the Trial of the Eagle. This is actually a pretty cool puzzle when done quickly, and it's one of my favorite puzzles in the game, as a matter of fact, casually and speedrun, but of course we're going to skip it because puzzles are slow. Like with the Peruvian jungle in the tomb, I'm going to do an airwalk, which can be kind of tricky because this particular airwalk likes to not cooperate. Thankfully I got there though, that was second try I think. So once we have the airwalk, I'm going to run over here behind these rocks, which are definitely solid, on top of these rocks that are actually solid, in order to gain a bunch of height. And one thing you'll notice as I go up these rocks here, if I don't fall out of bounds that is, one thing you'll notice as I'm running through the air here, for one, I'm constantly shaking the camera. That is because with the camera settings that I use, when you get the airwalk state, the game will constantly try to recenter the camera by moving it to the left or the right, depending on the airwalk you do. And that's annoying to most most speedrunners of this game, but I personally have the center camera horizontally function turned on, because it helps me determine whether or not that I have the airwalk. Rather it be somewhat determinable as opposed to being a complete guessing game. So I'm going to hit that water hitbox, which causes me to get sucked into that little area, and I'm going to climb up on top of that ledge and hit a checkpoint. And once I reload that checkpoint, in a second, the game will be back to normal, so I can progress with the game. So once we get out of the Peruvian jungle, the game, as far as the speedrun goes with the routing, is pretty much just glitch, glitch, glitch. There's a lot of fun glitches we'll be doing from here on out. Of course, there will be some breaks with the unskippable cutscenes like I mentioned before, but for the most part, we won't be doing anything as intended from here. For the most part, at least. There's some small things we'll be doing as intended, but for the most part, we'll be skipping a bunch of things, and it's really fun. This particular airwalk, though, is kind of scary, because if you mess it up, you lose around a minute, even with the safety save. Luckily, I'm pretty consistent at it, so it shouldn't go horribly wrong. And again, even if I do mess it up, I can just use a campfire save. So I'm going to use the campfire here, just for safety. And then I'm going to do another airwalk here. Before I do the airwalk, though, I have to grapple onto this thing, and then jump back. That is because if I try to grapple without grappling onto that thing first and then jumping back, instead of grappling on the ledge like this, Lara will instead grapple onto that thing hanging from the overhang. And we got the airwalk there, third try, which is pretty good. I want to say that's around second or third try. So like I said, this airwalk is kind of scary, even if you're pretty good at it, because with the method that I use, I need to make sure that I don't lose too much height. Because if I lose too much height, what will happen is I will hit the trigger for a cutscene that is not only several minutes long, but is also unskippable. So I really need to make sure that I don't hit that cutscene. And what makes not losing height in this section kind of annoying, though, is there's a lot of trees and shrubbery, like with the previous Out of Bounds, that are solid and can cause you to gain or lose height. So I just need to make sure that I don't touch those trees or shrubbery. Which is not too bad because I know where to go in order to avoid those bits of collision. So we've gotten the airwalk here. I just need to jump down here, and let's trigger that checkpoint. And I trigger that checkpoint there just so I have a checkpoint or save to revert back to in case I fail an upcoming skip. So by doing that airwalk, we skip a cutscene, where it's actually a pretty good cutscene, where we meet 2 or 3 key characters named Etzli, Unuratu, and Uchu. Well, we'll be skipping that for the sake of speed. And a side effect of skipping that cutscene, which is really nice actually, is that it despawns all the NPCs that are in this city area, which is named Paititi. And it's really nice that we get to despawn those enemies, or NPCs, because those NPCs cause a lot of lag, even on good PCs. So there's normally quite a bit we'd have to do in Paititi, but I could probably guess I'm going to skip it with an airwalk here. This particular airwalk can be pretty mean to me in runs like the airwalk in the Trial of the Eagle, so hopefully we get it pretty quickly here. And it looks like I got a third try there, which is really nice. So once I have the airlock state, I'm going to run up these stairs, and I'm running up these stairs because I want to gain a bunch of height for future out-of-bounds sequence. So this is the top here. This is about as much height as I need to progress. So I'm gonna get on top of those bricks there and keep on moving. I want to get to this pillar that's behind these trees in the background in order to do another outbound sequence on the rocks next to me. So you'll see that here. This section is kind of scary, I guess, because you can accidentally fall in bounds, but that shouldn't really happen. So I'm going to do some jumps on these rocks and jump back in bounds. And that actually just skipped a huge portion of the game, because that ends up skipping 3 or 4 tombs or so that you'd have to do as part of the story, and a run, or not really a run and gun sequence, but a timed running section, kind of like the Tsunami and Cozumel, where there'd be a few cult members that would chase you through Paititi, and there's normally a quest that we have to do in this tomb, but the door that forces us to do the tomb is deloaded, so we can just keep jump rolling through this area. And once I get to the top here, I'm actually going to reload checkpoint as soon as the checkpoint triggers, because as you kind of saw there, the NPCs are deloaded, and we need this NPC right here, whose name is Unuratu, to be spawned in for this upcoming walk and talk sequence. So, the reason we need Unuratu to be spawned in for this walk and talk sequence is because, when you try to do this walk and talk sequence without having Unuratu spawned in, what'll happen is you'll get to the point where the walk and talk sequence starts, but you'll get completely stuck in place and not really be able to do anything. So I had to do that. This cutscene, or rather this walk and talk sequence, is the first point of the game where we meet a character named Dominguez. It's not the first point in the actual game that we meet him, but it's the first point in a speedrun where we meet him. The thing with Dominguez is that he is a fanatic worshipper of this thing named Kukulkan. Kukulkan, in the lore of the game, is the Mayan god of creation and destruction, and Dominguez, as a worshipper of Kukulkan, wants to remake the world in his image by using the silver box and the silver dagger. Obviously we don't want him to do that because that succeeding entails the world ending, so we want to try to stop him. There's a problem that comes up, though, as part of the plot, which is that Trinity, who is kind of the villain of the Tomb Raider reboot trilogy, takes advantage of the situation and gives Dominguez the means that he needs in order for his plan to succeed, which is they give him access to their military forces. And so that kind of complicates things later in the game as far as saving the world. And so the plot for pretty much the last half of this game is pretty much a wild goose chase to get the silver box before Dominguez does, so he doesn't end the world. And so that will be kind of the recurring theme for the last few areas of the game here, once we get out of Paititi. Once we get out of this area, there's like 3 major areas that we have to do. And they're all pretty quick with the speedrun strats and skips that we use. So we go over to this door, and there's these 2 guards here that we need to get past in order to progress. And so we tell them the secret password here. And they let us through here because they're like, yeah, you're totally some person that we're supposed to let in this door, even though you're only made up of around 15 polygons by now. So after getting past those 2 guards, we come across a cutscene here where there's a tomb that's revealed to our left there. We'd normally have to go in that tomb, and then after that tomb there'd be a fight sequence where, spoilers, Unuratu dies, but we don't have time for any combat or any tombs really in this run, so instead we're going to go off to the side here. We're going to use the same scramble clip glitch as before to get through this door. And then I'm going to squeeze through this gap to initiate a cutscene. This cutscene is kind of funny in a speedrun context, I suppose, because the context behind this cutscene is Unuratu dies, and it's supposed to be a pretty emotional cutscene because of that, as you'll see a bit later, but since we skipped the fight sequence by doing that scramble clip I just did, technically Unuratu isn't actually dead. And so, again, it's another point where this game kind of has a plot hole in the speedrun context. But it's fine, we'll just ignore it, I guess. And this cutscene is one of the funnier cutscenes in the game with the Tomb Raider 2 skin on, because Etzli here, we're going to give him Unuratu's amulet, but you'll see that the game doesn't really have these cutscenes with the older models in mind, because Lara doesn't have an animation for the Tomb Raider 2 model of opening her hand, and so the amulet is just clipping through her knuckles like that with the Tomb Raider 2 skin, and I believe it does the same thing if you put on the other Tomb Raider 2 skin. There's another version of the skin you can put on where she has a jacket on, but this is the skin that people usually go for when they use the skin in runs. And I've had a glitch happen on this cutscene that I haven't ever had happen otherwise, or I've rarely ever had happen, or rather I've only had it happen once, where Etzli and Jonah decided to just not spawn in during this cutscene, and so they were despawned for the duration of the cutscene. And the cutscene is kind of weird with Etzli and Jonah despawn, because when Etzli has the amulet there and he puts it up to his chest, it looks like the amulet is just swinging in midair, and it looks really silly. But yeah, now that Unuratu is unfortunately dead, we decide to go back to Kuwagyaku to regroup and figure out what to do next to stop Trinity. Also, this river sequence is really bright for some reason. This will lead to the next area of the game, which is the oil fields. The oil fields, in my opinion, is probably the best section in the entire run, because you get a good mix of doing the game as intended with some kind of interesting combat sections, and we also get probably one of the coolest looking skips in the entire game that you'll definitely want to look out for here. So that'll be coming up pretty soon. I'd definitely say, while it is a pretty cool area as far as speedrun tricks and combat goes, it is also one of the hardest areas in the game. And for good reason, because the skip I'll be doing coming up is probably the hardest skip, or actually the hardest skip in the game, as far as any percent goes. So hopefully that goes decently well, because it can dock you a bunch of time if it goes awry. So, again, going with the running theme in this game with Lara's Day going horribly wrong, we think we're fine, but no, there's still this Trinity helicopter trying to kill us. So this is another unskippable cutscene. Once the screen kind of fades to black after this part where Lara's in the water, we'll actually be able to skip the cutscene and go to some gameplay. So right after that, we'll be able to skip the cutscene. Alright, so for this first combat section, it's need to dodge roll past these guards. Keep in mind these diamonds that will appear on the screen, right there. That's sort of the guard's alert meter. When it fills up with white, that means they're suspicious of you. And when it starts filling up with red, that means they're starting to get alerted. And if it completely fills with red, they will start shooting at you, and you really don't want that, because there are points in these combat sections where I'll have to climb on some ledges, and if the guards are shooting at me, I will be unable to climb on top of those ledges. Thankfully, the first two combat sections are pretty easy, so you don't have to worry about that. We'll just keep on chugging along. So, there's this cutscene here where the camera kind of pans to show the rock face breaking apart. We can skip that though with a reload checkpoint. Alright, so here's probably the hardest skip in the game, the oil fields skywalk. Or rather, the oil fields airwalk that goes into a skywalk. Like before, I want to trigger an airwalk, which I actually got first try there. Then I want to do some dodge rolls over to this area just in front of me where that waterfall is. I want to run up to this rock face, so I'm going to do a trick called skywalking, which I'll explain later because it's pretty difficult. Got it there. If I time that W press too late, I fall to my death, so I have to be really careful about that. I'm going to do this bit of movement here, which gives me just enough momentum to get up this rock face, to grapple there, and then jump back in bounds. So that might have looked pretty mundane, but that actually skips a huge portion of the game, because or it doesn't really skip anything, it just gets past the section where we normally need the grappling hook. By doing the sequence breaking we did before in Paititi, we skipped getting a very necessary piece of equipment, which is the overhang climbing gear. So you'd normally be soft locked there, but we can get past that area with a skywalk. I'll explain skywalking in after this next combat section here. First I just need to get past these guys. I'm going to grab this gas canister here, and this is why I need the cloth to craft this explosive gas canister. I'm going to toss it between those two guards, and that kills them immediately, so I can just go past them. So, skywalking. How skywalking works is, if you're falling on a sloped surface and you press the movement key that's opposite relative to the direction Lara is facing, relative to the camera. So say for example she's facing towards the camera, you press W. You'll get in a state where Lara is kind of still in the falling animation, but you can still control her and move her around. And I utilize that to get up that slope, which we normally need the overhang climbing gear to get past. And I also, just a bit ago, did a reload checkpoint to skip a walk-and-talk sequence with Jonah. This first section is pretty neat. There is an outbounds you can do to skip this section and another section coming up. But I don't do that outbounds because if you mess it up, you soft-lock the game. So I'm going to do this section as intended instead, which is not much slower. It's only about 50 seconds to a minute slower, so it's not that much of a time loss. In this section, we gain a new type of arrow called Jaguar Sphere. What Jaguar Sphere is it's essentially built-in friendly fire. You shoot it at an enemy, and the enemy will hallucinate and shoot their own comrades that are in the immediate vicinity. So the enemies basically take care of the other enemies for us, which is really nice in sections like this, where there's a bunch of enemies grouped together that you have to take care of without dying. So I'm going to shoot that guy right there with an explosive arrow, or not an explosive arrow, but a Jaguar Sphere arrow. I'll kill this one guard right there. And then once he's done, I'm going to shoot this last guy with an arrow, get to the entrance of the combat section here to leave. And I'm going to reload checkpoint here to skip the animation of Lara squeezing through that gap. Alright, and we get this dialogue sequence here with a character named Rower, who is kind of the guy who's been commanding the Trinity forces that have been trying to kill us. Also, Lara's sailor mouth gets shown off here. The cursing in this game shouldn't be a problem, but if it does end up being a problem, I can turn subtitles off or change the voice language. I'm sure the cursing shouldn't be a problem though, because there's not that much of it that we come across in a speedrun. But anyway, Roark, who's been commanding the Trinity forces that have been trying to kill us, fools us into thinking that he's killed Jonah. And so in a fit of rage, Lara is going to kill some Trinity soldiers coming up in a fight sequence. But first off, we have to do this climbing sequence to get up this tower. This section is pretty straightforward for the most part. Like with most climbing sections, we're just going to climb up these series of ledges here. The kind of annoying thing with this particular climbing sequence is if you mash jump too early to get to the next ledge, the game will eat your input. So you kind of have to space out your jumps properly in order to not waste time. So we're almost done with the climbing sequence, we just have a bit more to go. And even with doing the section in bounds, there's a neat little trick you can do that I'll be doing here as soon as this climbing sequence ends. Alright, so after this climbing sequence ends, I'm going to start running immediately and do some jump rolls. And if I move this area fast enough, I will get past this bridge right here before it collapses, which saves a bit of time. So we have a fight sequence with the chopper here, or rather we have a fight sequence with some Trinity soldiers here. And the nice thing about doing this fight quickly is you're normally intended to shoot these guys, but it turns out you just have to shoot the explosive barrels and the fight ends anyway. We do have to shoot some enemies though in order for these barriers to break open so we can shoot the barrels. So we shot all the explosive barrels there. The helicopter falls down, which signals that the fight ends. And we get another unskippable cutscene where Lara kind of realizes what she's done by killing all these Trinity soldiers. And it's a... I actually forgot to do this, but I meant to bring the Tomb Raider 2 skin into this cutscene. Probably just because of muscle memory. Because during this cutscene, which you'll see in a bit, and you'll see in a bit in this cutscene, that Lara starts crying when Jonah comes into the cutscene a little bit. And with the Tomb Raider 2 skin on, it doesn't really look like she's crying because she just has this deadpan polygonal face. And this section is cutscene rather, is actually kind of a important part of the plot because during this section where she's just crying after she realizes what she's done, killing these Trinity soldiers, she realizes, or rather has a eureka moment, and realizes where the next clue is in the trail of clues that she's been following, which is this church in a place called which is this church of San Juan, and that's where we'll be going for the next area of the game. There's not too much to say here, so for an actual marathon performance of this would be another good point for donations. Alright, so we're almost out of the cutscene. Now, once this cutscene ends, we'll get to, like I said, the next area of the game, which is Mission of San Juan. Mission of San Juan is pretty fun because there's a trick we can do to skip pretty much all of the area, and there's also a neat combat section that we do right after that. Or we can't skip this first part of the cutscene, but we can skip some of the cutscene later. Basically, once Lara gets out of the car, we'll be able to press space to skip the cutscene. Alright, and just so I don't forget, I'm going to go to the campfire so I can equip the Tomb Raider 2 skin. Alright, so this is the Mission of San Juan. Normally, when you do this area, there'd be a puzzle where you go into a crypt and find the silver box. And then after you get the silver box, there would be, I think, 3 in total fight sequences you would have to do with some Trinity soldiers. Instead, we're going to skip that. And to do that, I'm going to go way out of the way here, because 1, this is where the out of bounds is, and 2, if I go into that corner, I get a safety checkpoint, just in case. So I'm going to hold down left here, and very slowly move the camera down left as well. What that'll do is that'll clip me out of bounds next to that palm tree, which that's actually a pretty consistent method to get that particular out of bounds. I'm going to jump on top of this tree trunk, and then jump on top of these rocks to keep on moving. Like before, it's kind of hard to see where you are because of all the trees and shrubbery, but you can just like stop right here for a moment, and the map loads in, so it's a bit easier to tell where you're going. That's actually a really tight jump there, so I'm glad that I got that. If I didn't get that jump, I'd do a backup where I'd fight some Trinity soldiers that spawn in this room, but thankfully I didn't have to resort to that. So I'm going to do a scramble clip to get to that door. You're supposed to trigger some Trinity dudes that kind of walk around this area, and you do a stealth section to get past them by rolling through the grass. But by clipping through that door, we skip the trigger, so we can just ignore that fight sequence there as well. There's a group of Trinity soldiers that we have to fight here. As soon as the checkpoint triggers, though, I'm going to checkpoint reload, because if I didn't reload checkpoint, there'd be a bunch of pigs that run around this area. And keeping in mind what I said before about easy having auto-aim, when I try to shoot the soldiers, instead of aiming at the soldiers, the gun would aim at the pigs, and we don't want that. There is a scramble clip, kind of like the one I just did, that you can use to skip this entire fight sequence, but you actually can't do that, because if you clip through the door here at the end, you will soft lock the game, because there is a cutscene at the end of this area, and that cutscene will only trigger if you kill all these enemies, so I do have to do this fight sequence as normal. That was the last guy there, so we can move on. You can do some movement here once that mini cutscene triggers to save a bit of time. It doesn't save much. Doing that jump there doesn't save much, but it's still worth it to go for. Get another cutscene here, where Jonah tries to get the silver box back from Dominguez. Fortunately, it doesn't work, though, and he gets pushed out of the helicopter. As you can see right there, Dominguez has the silver box. For whatever reason, this cutscene is another one of those unskippable cutscenes. It's really arbitrary what the developers said, what cutscenes the developers decided, okay, this one is going to be unskippable so people can enjoy the story, I guess, and which ones are skippable. It's really weird how they decided which cutscenes are skippable and which aren't. And it seems like they're pretty arbitrary in their decision on that. The good thing, though, is that there's a mini cutscene right after this cutscene, which we can skip, so that's nice. So after Dominguez steals the silver box, and we get into another cataclysm as part of the plot, or rather another natural disaster as part of the plot. There's this landslide here that we have to outrun. And like with the other time running sections I did earlier, this section is pretty straightforward for the most part. You basically just want to optimize your movement here by doing some jump rolls. You want to be sure that you don't jump roll too much, because if you jump roll too much, you will outpace the breaking apart of the ground here, and more than likely fall in a pit and die. So I just want to be careful of that as I go through here. You also don't want to be too slow going through here, because if you are too slow going through here, you will get killed by the landslide, and you obviously don't want that. The other additional kind of scary thing about dying, at least early on in this running section, is you don't get a checkpoint until around this point right here, where the ground breaks apart and I fall down the slope. So if I died at any point before that point where I just got the checkpoint, I would get sent back to the beginning of this running section, so I'd have to do all of that over again if I died. Luckily we have the checkpoint though, so it's fine. So that point right there where I just where I did all those jump rolls, that's not the most common death point for me. The most common point for me to die is like right here at the end where I have to jump on these platforms, because these platforms move side to side and it makes it kind of hard to jump on them. But we got past that, so we're fine. We have 2 cutscenes, or I guess 3 cutscenes, back to back here. Luckily, though, these are the last bits of long cutscenes I'll have to watch in the run. Sorry for that interruption there, I just had to do something for a quick second. Anyway, what happens in this double whammy of cutscenes is, obviously, Dominguez stole the silver box, and that's pretty bad, because that means he's about to put his end of the world ritual into motion. And so we have to think of a backup plan, which is what we'll be doing in the next cutscene. There's a fun little thing I can do after this next cutscene, which I'll be showing off. It doesn't really save time, and in fact wastes time, but it still looks funny. This section is kind of, or rather, these cutscenes are kind of sectioned off or bisected because in the midst of these cutscenes, you have around 4 sections of gameplay, or 4 sections, 4 seconds of gameplay, I mean. And during that 4 seconds of gameplay, you can kind of just wander around the hub, or rather, during that little break in gameplay, you can kind of just walk around the hub. And I'm going to take this time to showcase something. So, you can do some melee swings in front of Etzli and then just... Alright. I'm going to try to do some melee swings basically to hit Etzli. Hopefully I'm able to do it. It's kind of tricky to do though, so we'll see. Dang it, I'm not quite hitting Etzli here. Whatever. So what I was going to try to do is hit Etzli and some blood would have come out, but fortunately I wasn't able to do it there. And I don't want to do it anymore because I don't want to waste time. I want to keep the run going, obviously. Hitting Etzli, by the way, doesn't do anything. It doesn't actually kill him. It's just something funny you can do during this bit of downtime. So yeah, this section of the game, or rather this cutscene, is going to lead to the next, or last area of the game, which is... It's called the City of the Serpent, but I call it in my splits Point of No Return, because that's what it's called in-game. The special thing about Point of No Return is that we do not get any campfire saves. We don't get any at all. Which is kind of scary, I guess, when you consider that the airwalk we'll be doing coming up will lose 3 seconds if I miss it. Did I say 3 seconds? 3 minutes, I mean. Luckily, though, if I hit a wrong checkpoint and I end up loading inbounds and I die, I can just make a hard save and then go back to that hard save. That's the nice thing about this game for a marathon run, is that it does have really tough skips like the other Tomb Raider reboots do, as you might have seen with Studios Run the Rise of the Tomb Raider, a previous GDQ. But the thing with this game, and I think the other reboots as well that make it kind of nice for marathon or no reset running, is you can make hard saves or even get convenient checkpoints right before the points where you do the main skips. And that'll definitely come into play in this next skip, because there's a checkpoint that triggers right before the point where I do the skip. So I can just revert back to that if I happen to die. So yeah. Moral of the story, for those that didn't listen to my explanation there, it's a tough game, it really is, especially when you get into the nitty-gritty in terms of optimizations for some harder methods of skips you can do that save just a little bit of time, but you can still do it pretty consistently in a marathon setting, is the point I'm trying to get at. So we opened the Point of No Return with a swimming section. If you remember from before, you can just reload checkpoint in order to refill your air gauge during swimming sections. So I'll be doing that here. We won't be doing the swimming section for too long. We'll get to the fun stuff in just a bit, but for now we do have to go through this kind of slog right here. So checkpoint is going to trigger here, so reload checkpoint again there to reload refill my air gauge. And I can just keep on swimming. It's kind of like the saying in Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. That's exactly what we're going to do here to progress with the section. Those rocks kind of fall down your way there, but they're not that much of a worry. You really don't have to worry about hitting anything during that entire swimming section. It's pretty easy for the most part in terms of going fast. So once I skip this cutscene, there's a checkpoint that triggers. Again, if I do happen to hit a checkpoint in a wrong place and load and bounds, that's fine because I have a hard save to go back to. So I'm going to do a airwalk here, like most of the areas in the game. Which I think I got? We'll see. Ah, I didn't get it, unfortunately. So I'll have to try it again. That's fine. There we go, now we're in the air. So now I just have to run through the air here to this rock face that I need to get to in the distance. I need to go up that rock face in order to gain a bunch of height to get to the final boss arena, which you can kind of see in the top right. The scary thing with this particular airwalk is you see these helicopters flying in the background. If they happen to hit me, which they almost did just now, if the helicopters happen to hit me, I will lose a bunch of height very quickly, or rather, they will pretty much instantly kill my airwalk. And that's obviously no good, because that means I will fall to my death. Thankfully, that helicopter was nice, though. I've definitely had a couple of no reset runs, I think, where I got hit by that helicopter and died. It's rare, but the helicopters can hit you. That's not the last point where it can happen either. So anyway, I'm going to climb up this rock face. The thing with this rock face is that it has really steep level geometry. And so in order to get to the top of this rock face, I need to do some kind of zigzag movement here to kind of boost myself up. But I need to do that to get to this rock here, so I can gain a bunch of height and keep on moving. The neat thing about this area is that during this little bit where you're running behind this rock face, the game doesn't recenter the camera, so I can just like take my hand off the mouse for a moment there. Once I get around this corner, though, the game will start recentering the camera again, so I have to continue shaking the camera. Unfortunately, the airwalks aren't very kind to people with motion sickness, but it's fine for the most part. I tried not to be too sudden with my camera shakes. So I need to do that gain height there to run over to this mountain. I need to go up this mountain right here to gain even more height to get to the final boss arena. And when you're first doing this trick, and when you're learning the game, it's kind of difficult to figure out where to go, but I know where to go already since I've done this out of bounds once or twice. So I can just run up the mountain here. Again, this mountain has pretty steep level geometry, like the rock face we went up before. So I have to do some zigzag movement to get up here. The annoying thing about going up this mountain fast is there's little tiny bits of collision where if you happen to hit them, they will instantly kill your sprint, like that. And so you end up having to repress the sprint key to get moving again. Which is kind of annoying, but it's not too big of a deal for the most part. So now we've gained a bunch of height, we can just run on over to the final boss arena here. And you'll notice that the final boss arena is pretty barren right now. We've actually already done a sequence break in this final boss arena. Because there's normally supposed to be a few guards that chase you as you try to break open these pedestals. But by going into this area from out of bounds, those guards aren't spawned, and so we can open these pedestals without any worry. I need to open 3 pedestals here in order to trigger the final boss. And along the way, I'll be grabbing some ammo here for the assault rifle, just so I'm covered on ammo for this next fight. Alright. So this is the final boss. It's a fight with Dominguez. The idea behind this fight is pretty simple, as you'll see in a second. At least as far as final bosses go. Basically, what I want to do, as soon as I gain control here, is I want to run away from Dominguez, just to be sure that he doesn't have a chance to hit me. And then I'm going to shoot Dominguez a bunch with the assault rifle. And then once I shoot him enough, he'll go into that orange orb right there, and once he gets in the orange orb, I can stab him, and that'll progress to the next phase. There's 5 phases in this fight, and we just did the first phase, so we'll have 4 more phases to do here. And the kind of scary thing about this fight is you do not get a checkpoint until you beat the 3rd phase of the fight. And so if I die at any point before that, I will end up having to restart the fight from the beginning. And you also want to make sure, the reason you want to make sure you're not so close to Dominguez is that one of his attacks is he swings a sword at you that creates a bunch of flames. And that sword attack that he does is a little bugged. It can hit you even when you're very far away from him. So you want to be sure that you're as far away from him as possible before you start shooting him, which I'm doing a good job of here. And the auto-aim helps a lot with shooting Dominguez here. So I believe that's the 3rd phase done right there. So once we get the checkpoint there, we're in the clear. You'll notice that black and white circle in the background there. It's actually a solar eclipse, but because we entered this area in an unintended way, that it just turns into a black and white circle there instead of the solar eclipse that it is now. And I reload checkpoint there to get more ammo for the last 2 phases of the fight here. And time is coming up pretty soon, because we're on the last phase of the fight. Time will basically be when I stab Dominguez for the final time here, which will be coming up pretty soon. And time. There we go, that was actually a very good run. For reference, the RTA in my PB was around an hour and 12 minutes. And we just beat this run completed this run rather, in less than an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm gonna exit to the main menu here. Unfortunately, we can't watch the ending cutscenes in this run because due to the sequence breaking that we did and the point of no return there, the ending cutscenes don't properly load. And so at a certain point during the cutscenes, the game just straight soft locks because it displays a black screen that we can't really get past. And the only way to get out of that black screen is to Alt F4 out of the game. So yeah, that was Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It's a really fun speedrun, as I hope you saw there. And I feel like, even though it has some unskippable cutscenes that are kind of unfortunate to have to sit through, it's a really fun run, and I think the GDQ audience would like this a lot. And in general, Tomb Raider has had a bit of a resurgence, I'd say, at GDQ lately. So hopefully you consider this run as a part of getting that resurgence going, I guess. But yeah, this has been my submission of Shadow of the Tomb Raider for AGDQ. I'm Nerd Squared, and I hope you consider my run.